women have been subject to widespread violence by men, and there's a footnote, and you look at the reference, you look it up, and you find some other feminists saying women have been subject to widespread violence by, there's never a fact, there's never any concrete evidence. And but the sad thing, though, I actually have a quotation from two conservative scholars, or a very prominent American intellectual, conservative intellectual, says that one of the problems with no-fault divorce is that men are abandoning women in huge numbers. And he has a footnote. And you look it up, and it's another very prominent American conservative scholar, and he says, under no-fault divorce, men are going to start abandoning women in large numbers. And, so this infects, the whole political spectrum. And these men, these two conservative scholars, would agree with everything you said about postmodernism and about the Frankfurt School and so forth. And yet here they're doing the exact same thing. I agree with you about the importance of the Frankfurt School and critical theory in that. I think we've entered a stage in a whole different dimension. I think when we got into things like women's studies and gender studies and queer studies, I think the whole thing has exploded. It's no longer just a theoretical or epistemological problem. It's a whole. These gender studies and women's studies programs are training huge numbers of social workers and other people, other ideological shock troops and activists out there. So I think we've entered a whole other stage where the academies. I mean, I get advertisements in my inbox every day almost about big, thick textbooks on how to do social work, philosophy of social work, complexity of social work, reflecting about social work. All of these trying to make social work a respectable academic discipline like philosophy or theology or something. And you can see what's going on here. I mean, the universities are retooling themselves as the seminaries for the sexual revolution and for other government civil servants who are carrying out these policies. So you're right, it's poisonous. And I think many people, my fear is that there are many people, a number of conservative scholars in the universities who would agree with everything you said on critical theory and postmodernism, and yet they're turning a blind eye to what's going on now with this latest stages of what's going on. So I think we need to wake up people even more than because there is a conservative movement in and out of the academies to bring back the classics and bring back the great books and so forth, and that's fine. I applaud that. I work at an institution where that kind of thing is encouraged, and we do that. But I think it's not just what isn't being taught; it's also what is being taught that's poisonous, and we need to spend time looking at that as well.
Isn't there also, there's also an issue of this victimhood thing. I mean, I was the only boy in a family of four, and whenever there was a row, the parental solution was to give the boy a clip on the ear, and that was justice, and that was the solution. And that's actually writ large now what's going on. It's like that, men have front-loaded all their joy, all their gains, all their prosperity, all their happiness, and they're going to have to suffer now for a couple of centuries.
Yeah, I don't really address that problem in the book directly, but I do a little bit in the conclusion. And I come to the conclusion that, this is kind of tentative, but in a way the feminists pay men a certain compliment, and that is they hold men responsible. And there is a line of thought that says that inevitably it is the man that is going to be held responsible. And I'm not sure that complaining about that as a grievance is constructive. I think accepting that and making the best of it and taking the responsibility and acting is probably the most constructive thing men can do, because just whining about the fact that we're getting blamed, yeah, we do get blamed. I think that's almost the way of the world.
We are, after all, the protectors.
We're the ones protected. It is the man that is responsible when things go wrong, no matter what happens. When things go wrong, it's the man that's blamed by society, by the courts, and I'm not sure that we can do anything. I'm increasingly beginning to feel that there's no point in complaining about that. It's got to be accepted, and we got to.
I'll take responsibility for the things I do wrong. I will not, repeat, not take responsibility for the crap that other people unload upon me, okay? The things I have done wrong in my life are bad enough, and a burden to bear. I will not be blamed for the dissolution of Western society, and that's not my responsibility.
Let me pose a problem, okay? Because this is growing here in the British Isles, and it started in America as usual. It's growing. This situation of men being accused in universities, for example, of rape accusations. Okay, this is outrageous in my opinion, and I've said so all the way along. Everyone knows that there's no rape academic, and I could cite you women scholars who say this. Okay, there is no rape academic I'll say this on the record, there's no rape epidemic in the universities. This is mostly a hoax. It is made up. Innocent men are being punished, and that's obvious to me. Okay? At the same time, and I won't compromise that. At the same time, we have been indulging for years in a sexual orgy in the universities of hookup culture and so forth, and that's not healthy. Whether you're a man or a woman, it's not healthy. A gentleman, a man, who takes advantage or uses a woman sexually, of course, he's not guilty of rape, but he is asking for trouble. And, I think men shouldn't do that. I think they should rise above that. And you can look at it theologically, if you want to look at it theologically, there used to be a distinction in the theologians, it was a commonplace definition. You can be unjustly punished by the human authorities and justly punished by God. And men who indulge in hookup culture and jump from one woman to the next, if you accuse them of rape, that's unjust, and that's wrong. On the other hand, you can see a kind of divine justice in this. If men accepted the fact that they aren't behaving the way a gentleman behaves, or a leader behaves, or the natural leader of the society behaves, and stop doing that and take sexual again, because no society can allow uncontrolled sexual indulgence. It's not. The Puritans taught us that in the English-speaking world. Maybe this isn't the place to mention the Puritans. But I wrote my doctoral thesis on the Puritans.
Yeah.
So,
Just a quick point. I think economics is partly going to be the solution to this. You were talking about sort of new universities and new faculties of gender studies. All of this emerged after World War II, because the West, the Americans, and whatever, won World War II. The West controlled 60-70% of world trade, and it was very wealthy. And there was a lot of money available for things like new universities and new faculties. As things change, as wealth moves east, and as well, the most indebted countries now, I think, are the developed countries, huge national. There's going to be a change. We're not going to be able to afford all of these many extra universities, factories. That will actually, the economics of this is important, and it is going to be part of a long-term solution.
yeah, you're right about that. I mean, if you look at the places where the blowback, the reaction against all of this, where it's happening really is in places like Eastern Europe and the global South, where people, even in universities, are reacting against the sexual revolution in countries like Poland and further east, Romania. But there's, of course, the sexual radicals are targeting those countries as well now.
Tom?
Just slightly obliquely, John, I have a friend, and his thesis is that when you had large families, the pressure on the family meant the parents had to send one or two sons and to join an army. But the way our Western world has gone now, with essentially one or two children, no parent or single parent will send a son or a daughter to join the army to defend our way of life. And I was about a year ago when it sort of went crazy over here, because Erdogan in Turkey was encouraging large families. And I looked up the population of Turkey in the last 30 years has essentially gone from 30 million, and it's now over 95 million. And the pressure of populations in history has sorted out many problems, in my limited reading of it anyway. Makes sense?
It's an interesting question. I don't deal with those issues. I deal mostly with the politics, because it's hard to know where that's leading. But I'm sure there's something in that. And the demographic crisis in the West is certainly part of this mix. Absolutely. Why is the family declining? Well, there's a number of explanations for it. The one that hasn't been really considered so much in the mainstream media is that men are on strike. Helen Smith wrote a book a few years ago called Men on Strike. And it's basically it's men that are refusing to have families and children because of the fear of divorce courts. I don't think that's all of it, but I think that's part of it. Yeah.
Just looking at it from a point of view of any of us who might think we should try to do something about it, you look around and you see political society is a closed society. It's very hard to get in there, very hard to sort of make any kind of state making any impact. Traditional media is a very closed society, and we have, I suppose, and the academia is a very closed society. All we have in some ways is what we call social media. That is still, I know it's chaotic and it has all, but it is still a place where we can go to speak and be heard. And I just wonder whether there are strategies we need to think about in terms of making better use of it. If you have any ideas to how this, because look at, would any of us have heard of Jordan Peterson had it not been for social media? And I think he is a voice which, you know, is saying a lot of the things that we do need to hear, and saying them very loudly. But how many of the rest of us can be Jordan Peterson, I don't know.
I mean, I think you're right. I think the whole internet, in many ways, is is a medium that is used more by men than others, than television, for example. And I think there's a lot of potential, but of course, always kind of technological developments, they can be two-edged swords, and it's hard to know where we are going with them. I would certainly encourage people to use them. I don't use the Facebook type things as much, although I'm told I should be using the YouTube more, and so I might start that. And I still like to think that people read the written word. I like to think that words in a journal, you know, that there's still a role for journals with editors, with even print journals, because they carry authority. Not that a lot of people read them or get them, but that, you know, people need to sort out what's good from what's bad, and that's what an editor or a print journal or an established name has some authority. But the names with authority have all become so culturally politicized that it's hard to, we can't trust those either. So what do you trust? That's what people are asking out there. You know, what can I read that's not some guy with a YouTube button?
It's just that it can give us a way back into those other closed agencies, which are closed now, but as in the case of Peterson, he is being listened to. He is, they can't ignore him, and as I say, we wouldn't be hearing him had he not made that use of social media.
Unfortunately, he's also said some very rude and inaccurate things about fathers groups, which I'm
I'm not really advocating his line on anything, but
I understand.
that
Yeah.
it's a way in which a voice which is different can be heard.
Yeah, well, I work at an institution that's a college, it's a university, which is only 18 years old, and which is an attempt to create a Christian counterculture, which deals with these. We specialize in educating homeschool students. I think homeschooling is a great way to do it. Unfortunately, it usually takes an intact family. But this is the kind of alternative institution that people have been advocating. Like the late Paul Weyrich advocated this, and other people. I think it's a good idea.
In the American context, what impact has the Heritage Foundation? Is it
Very little.
very little?
They stay away from these issues. Very superficial treatment of these issues. I don't mind saying that. They had a man who did family issues pretty well, Patrick Fagan, who's since left the Heritage Foundation, and I find most of their work very superficial. On that topic, I should say, on these topics, family issues.
We're Thursday attending an event here, so don't sound too coarse or crass or whatever I'd say. But are you aware? You say, are you aware of Saul Alinsky and Brzezinski in the American society?
Yeah.
And you obviously know where I'm going with that sort of question, as in conspiratorial, which you say we kind of osmose to this position, but I would ascribe to the other. Second, you included in the morality that we should also return to Judeo-Christian morality, which I agree with 100%, but you included Islamic morality as well.
Well, it's a question. I don't know where to go with that. I certainly believe in Judeo-Christian sexual morality. I think it's been vindicated by the current chaos. I will say that, again, the turmoil in the Islamic world is very problematic in a number of ways.
Well, just a quick one. Sorry to cut
well,
across. Have you read the Quran? You know the Quran?
Well, yeah, I have. I don't know that I know it. I've
Well,
read
the
it.
Hadith and the Siyada.
I'll just point out one thing, and that is I do work. I send students and I work with groups at the United Nations, and I'll tell you that it's the Islamic countries and the Muslim countries and groups at the United Nations that have prevented abortion from being recognized as a human right, and have prevented same-sex marriage from being recognized as a human right in international law. The Christian groups do work with them. So, moderate Muslim groups have very strong and very effective views on family values.
I do concur. But there is a place for every religion and every opinion to be appreciated. But I would proffer one as a solution as opposed to what can we do. I think you're missing the boat that social media is the new mainstream media. I think you're a little bit behind it. Not that you can say us in Ireland here are behind it, right? Social media is where the news source comes from, and it's through your discernment, your trusted source that you gain your information. And if it relates to the truth of your understanding, then it is the truth. And if enough people ascribe to that, then that's where a movement comes from. And there is a movement growing here now.
Well, I think you may be right, because I mean, the established voices we used to respect, the Guardian, the BBC, the New York Times, they've spent their political capital, they've squandered their reputations, and we're back in a kind of nihilistic situation. So if we have to rebuild our authority and our cultural authorities from scratch, then so be it. We have no choice, and social media obviously is the way we're going to do it.
Anthony.
Ely, thank you for your very interesting presentation on your book and the idea that there's hope out there. It's around that I have a question for you. I'm 79, 80, so we say, not more than 80, in my 80th year. And sometimes it seems hopeless when I see what's going on. And I look down the line and I see my grandchildren. And I hear, they're, let's say they're early teens and they're listening to rape, abortion, the difficult one, misogyny, all this kind of language, not necessarily from the parents, but it's thrown out on the TV and all that sort of stuff. So they're picking all this stuff up. And the thought is, they don't know what they're picking up, but they'll realise it at a certain stage. But I somehow feel it's too late. We can only really start to work on my grandchildren's children. And that's where education really comes in. And I think on the educational side, the feminists have definitely, shall I say, put out of the curriculum here over the years, from what I know, and I've talked to teachers a lot about it. It's time for men to get back into education. And it has to be considered movement for men to get back into education. You've been talking about it in